Bloomberg Audio Studios.
Podcasts, radio, news.
Good morning, I'm Nathan Hager.
And I'm Karen Moscow. Here are the stories we're following today.
Karen, earnings and the Fed are clearly in focus for investors this week. Tomorrow, we get highly anticipated results from AI chip stalwart NVIDIA. Inflation figures at the end of the week will likely reinforce that long-awaited rate cuts are coming soon. In fact, in an interview with Bloomberg's Michael McKee, San Francisco Fed President Mary Daly agreed with Fed Chair Jay Powell's view it's time to cut rates.
Well, to my mind, we've been on this path of ready to adjust policy rates for several months. We just needed to get a little more confidence that inflation was truly on its path to 2%. And I wanted to see the labor market come into balance, but I think that's completely happened. And the risks to our goals are now balanced, and the time to adjust policy is upon us.
San Francisco Fed President Mary Daly says she and her colleagues will seek to prevent restrictive policy from harming the labor market.
Well, Nathan, as we await those earnings from NVIDIA tomorrow, another one of the so-called Magnificent Seven is making news this morning. Shares of Apple down about 0.25% in early trading. Its longtime chief financial officer is stepping down at the end of the year. Luca Maestri will hand his role to top deputy Kevin Perek after more than a decade. The company has described the move as a planned transition, with Maestri remaining at the firm in a reduced role, overseeing information technology and real estate functions.
Well, Karen, the saga over Paramount Global and its new ownership is taking a new twist this morning. Let's get the details from Bloomberg's Jeff Bellinger in New York.
Producer David Ellison's Skydance Media is set to become the new owner of Paramount Global. This comes after Seagram heir Edgar Bronfman Jr. dropped out late last night. The Hollywood studio says it expects to complete the deal with Skydance in the first half of 2025. David Ellison is the son of Oracle co-founder Larry Ellison. He is aiming to provide a fresh start for the parent of CBS and MTV. Laden with more than $14 billion in debt, Paramount has struggled to compete in streaming. It has also suffered as cable TV audiences canceled their subscriptions and abandoned traditional channels like CBS and Nickelodeon. It's reducing its U.S. workforce by 15%. It shut down Paramount Television studios this month. In New York, Jeff Bellinger, Bloomberg Radio.
All right, Jeff, thank you. Well, in Europe, shares of BHP up almost 1.5%. The world's biggest mining company posted profit that beat analysts' estimates. Revenue from iron ore and copper increased despite a deteriorating Chinese demand outlook. We spoke with CEO Mike Henry.
In China, a bit of a mixed picture. We're seeing strong growth in a number of segments that are important for commodity demand in China, and that includes automobiles, machinery, infrastructure, shipbuilding. But the property sector itself, which makes up about 20% of steel demand, that is weak. It's been weak for some time. We've seen fairly low levels of both sales and new starts. But the Chinese government is enacting policies that are intended to address that.
And BHP boss Mike Henry says he still expects China to hit its 5% growth target this year.
Karen, that news from BHP comes as the firm behind the Chinese online marketplace Temu suffered a $55 billion stock rout as economic headwinds take a toll on China's retailers. In the latest warning on the health of the Chinese economy, the CEO of PDD Holdings, Chen Lei, said revenue and profits must inevitably decline. Reacting to the news, shares in the e-commerce firm plunged by 29% yesterday in their biggest fall on record.
Well, Nathan, the White House is keeping the U.S.-China relationship in focus. National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan has arrived in Beijing for a 3-day visit, his first to China. He plans to meet with Foreign Minister Wang Yi and raise concerns over China's support for Russia and the Ukraine war. He also plans to restate U.S. positions on Taiwan and the South China Sea. China is likely to bring up Taiwan as well, along with U.S. tariffs and efforts to cut China off from advanced technology.
As far as the presidential race goes, Karen, we're getting more insights into Vice President Harris's economic vision from her husband. Second gentleman Doug Emhoff spoke at a fundraiser in Sag Harbor, New York last night. He called his wife a pro-growth capitalist who wants a forward-looking economy that helps everyone. Emhoff pointed to his own career as a business lawyer, saying she understood exactly what he was doing with his clients. Harris has rolled out an economic platform that includes expanded child tax credits and $25,000 for first-time home buyers. She has been criticized for not being as specific as past presidential campaigns.
Well, Nathan, a U.S. appeals court is being asked to reinstate the classified documents case against former President Donald Trump. And Bloomberg's Nancy Lyons has the latest.
Special counsel Jack Smith is appealing a Florida judge's decision to toss out the criminal case, charging the former president with mishandling classified documents. Judge Aileen Cannon dismissed the case last month, saying the appointment of Smith as special counsel was unconstitutional. Smith, in his appeal to the 11th U.S. Circuit Court of Appeals, says Cannon's decision is at odds with long-standing appointment practices in the Department of Justice as well as across the government. Donald Trump's team is due to respond to the government's brief in a month. Then the government will have another 3 weeks to reply. In Washington, Nancy Lyons, Bloomberg Radio.
All right, Nancy, thank you. We were planning on covering a space launch this morning, but the first ever private spacewalk is going to have to wait. SpaceX has scrubbed this morning's scheduled liftoff of Polaris Dawn with 4 private astronauts on board due to a ground-side helium leak. One of those 4 astronauts is billionaire Jared Isaacman, who's flown with SpaceX before and provided the funds for this mission. Isaacman and SpaceX engineer Sarah Gillis are planning to step outside the spacecraft on the 3rd day of the flight and both perform a spacewalk. The next launch window for Polaris Dawn is no earlier than tomorrow.
Well, Nathan, Wall Street is beginning to sour on the outlook for crude next year. Goldman Sachs and Morgan Stanley both lowering price forecasts. The two banks now foresee global benchmark Brent averaging less than $80 a barrel in 2025. Both expect that the crude market will be in surplus, with prices trending lower over the 12 months. And checking oil right now, West Texas Intermediate is down 0.6% at $76.93 a barrel. Brent is at $81.02. It's time now for a look at some of the other stories making news in New York and around the world. And for that, we're joined by Bloomberg's Michael Barr. Michael, good morning.
Good morning, Karen. New Yorkers have been told to keep their windows closed over the next few nights because the city will be spraying for mosquitoes to stop the spread of the West Nile virus. There are now 6 confirmed cases in New York City. Plans are to continue spraying in Brooklyn Wednesday night into Thursday morning. This New Yorker is happy to hear about the spraying.
They love me. It's something about my juicy blood. They definitely like me, so I'm concerned.
At least 30 states have now reported cases of West Nile. A forum was held in Butler, Pennsylvania, examining the attempted assassination of former President Donald Trump. It involves a bipartisan group of representatives. Republican Representative Mike Kelly of Pennsylvania.
There's not one person on this conference that's identifying just as a Republican or a Democrat. We're identifying as members of Congress on a task force with a task to restore the faith and trust and confidence the American people have to have in our system.
Along with Congressman Kelly was Democratic Florida Representative Jared Moskowitz.
I look forward to getting the facts of what failed that day. We were inches away from an American catastrophe.
Meanwhile, the Harris and Trump campaigns are arguing over whether microphones should be muted, except for the candidate whose turn it is to speak during upcoming debates. The next one is scheduled on ABC September 10th. A tragic start to the new school year at Rice University. A student was found shot to death in her dorm room yesterday in what appears to be a murder-suicide. The victim has been identified as a junior from Maryland, Andrea Rodriguez Avila. Rice University President Reginald LaRoche.
I want all of our students, our parents, and the entire Rice community to know that the Rice campus is safe and there is no immediate threat. And tonight we will wrap our arms around our students.
Authorities say the body of the shooter was also discovered in the dorm room with a self-inflicted gunshot wound and a note. Campus authorities believe the two were in a relationship. Finally, the NYPD boosted security as the U.S. Open is underway, and for the first time ever, organizers expect more than 1 million tennis fans to attend. We'll have more with sports and Dan Schwartzman straight ahead. Global news 24 hours a day and whenever you want it with the Bloomberg News Now. I'm Michael Barr, and this is Bloomberg. Karen.
All right, Michael Barr, thank you. And it is time now for the Bloomberg Sports Update with Dan Schwartzman. Dan, good morning.
Good morning, Karen. The Yankees opening up a 3-game set in Washington with a 5-2 win over the Nationals. Yankees getting solo home runs from Jazz Chisholm, Gleyber Torres, and Austin Wells.
Pitch is hit in the air to deep right. Oh, back goes the right fielder. You can forget this one. Austin Wells takes out his frustrations from 2 strikeouts with an absolute bomb to right field.
That's courtesy of WFAN. Nestor Cortez picking up his 8th win of the season, pitching 6 2/3 strong innings. Yankees moving 2 full games ahead of the Orioles in the American League East as Baltimore was idle. Yankees and Nats back at it tonight. Garrett Cole taking the mound versus Patrick Corbin. Mets coming off an off day there in Arizona tonight facing the Diamondbacks. Sean Manaea is on the hill for the Mets facing Eduardo Rodriguez. Mets starting the day 3 games back of the Atlanta Braves to the final National League wildcard slot. NFL Cut Day is today. All teams must pair their rosters from 90 to the 53 men they'll be carrying into the regular season. The year's final Grand Slam in tennis, the U.S. Open getting underway in New York with defending women's champion second seed Coco Gauff moving on to the second round in straight sets along with third seeded Aryna Sabalenka. Top seed Iga Swiatek plays her first round match this afternoon versus Kamila Rakimova. In the men's draw, second seed Novak Djokovic beginning his quest for his 25th Grand Slam trophy with a straight sets win. Top seed Jannik Sinner and third seed Carlos Alcaraz, they begin their tournaments today. That's your Bloomberg Sports Update. I'm Dan Schwartzman, Karen and Nathan.
Coast to coast on Bloomberg Radio, nationwide on Sirius XM, and around the world on Bloomberg.com and the Bloomberg Business app. This is Bloomberg Daybreak.
Good morning, I'm Nathan Hager. San Francisco Fed President Mary Daly says it is time for the Federal Reserve to cut interest rates. She is just the latest Fed official to echo Jay Powell's dovish Jackson Hole remarks. Speaking with Bloomberg's Michael McKee, Daly said she thinks rate cuts are coming next month, in part because of concerns about the labor market. We now bring you part of their discussion.
We've been on this path of ready to adjust policy rates for several months. We just needed to get a little more confidence that inflation was truly on its path to 2%. And I wanted to see the labor market come into balance, but I think that's completely happened. And the risks to our goals are now balanced, and the time to adjust policy is upon us.
Is there anything that could derail a cut in September?
To my mind, that would be hard to imagine at this point. I do see that adjusting policy is appropriate. We don't want to get ourselves into a situation where we're keeping policy highly restrictive into a slowing economy. And remember, every time inflation comes down, the policy gets more restrictive. And I think that's a recipe, if you will, for over-tightening and injuring the labor market and growth.
Well, the chairman and basically the Open Market Committee said coming out of the meeting that the downside risks are greater to unemployment than to inflation. How big are the downside risks to employment right now?
So we definitely have to keep that in mind because, as you know, the labor market, when it starts to adjust, often has adjusted abruptly and significantly. But right now we don't see any signs of that. You look at initial claims for unemployment insurance. You look at early indications of layoffs. They're just not present. And so that's not giving us any signs that there's a deterioration. Importantly, as you know, the Reserve Bank president spent a considerable amount of time talking to contacts, businesses, workers. We're really not hearing signs that firms are poised for layoffs. What they are doing is managing headcount, making sure that they really want to refill a job before they do it. But at this point, I don't see any warning signs of weakness, but we want to make sure that we are adjusting policy as we go so that it's ready for the economy we have and for the economy we're likely to get, and ensure that we don't end up in that situation where we see real weakness.
All right, let's talk about tactics. Markets are now pricing 100 basis points in cuts by the end of the year, but there are only 3 meetings left, which would imply at least 150 basis point cut. Do you think the markets are wrong, or is it a good possibility we see a 50 somewhere?
Well, I think everyone's looking at the economic projections and then making a decision. For me, what I'm going to be doing is looking at the incoming information. As you said, we have another CPI, another labor market report, discuss with my colleagues, talk to our contacts, and fashion the policy that's right for the economy that we see. So it's too early to know exactly what the tactics will be. We do know one thing: the direction of change is down, and we need to do it in a way that is responsive to the economy and not let the economy get in a position of weakness.
Well, let me quote the Fed back to you. If the economy evolves as we expect, as you always say, would that imply a 25 basis point cut in September versus 50?
So I think of it as scenarios, if I may. So the scenario that is my most likely outcome and what I see in the data and the projections is that we continue to get gradual slowing in inflation, and we continue to get that steady, sustainable pace of growth in the labor market. If those things happen, then adjusting policy at the regular normal cadence seems reasonable. But if we see further deterioration, or we haven't seen any deterioration yet in the labor market, if we should see deterioration or any signs of weakness, then being more aggressive to ensure that we don't see that it would be appropriate. So I think it's too early to know, and I don't want to make a declaration when none is necessary. The direction of change is down, and the time to adjust is now, in my opinion.
Some of your colleagues at the regional banks told me in Jackson Hole that they want to see a methodical, step-by-step process, and that companies want to see that as well. But markets are reading into a little bit of what Jay Powell said when he did not say, because he didn't use the word patient. Do you think that there is a sort of bias to maybe do more if the labor market is a little bit weaker than anticipated?
Well, let me speak about myself, and I see further signs that the economy or the labor market is slowing as unwelcomed, and I do not want to see that. That's not what we're looking for. We're looking for, and the chair said this in his speech, we're looking for inflation to come down, can be sustainably down to 2%, and for the labor market to stay right about where it is. We don't want to see additional weakness, because that's actually what we're trying to prevent. Ultimately, we have two goals: price stability, full employment. We're trying to get those two goals to simultaneously exist, and adjusting the policy rate to ensure that happens is what we will need to do.
This is Bloomberg Daybreak Today, your morning brief on the stories making news from Wall Street to Washington and beyond.
Look for us on your podcast feed at 6 a.m. Eastern each morning on Apple, Spotify, and anywhere else you get your podcasts.
You can also listen live each morning starting at 5 a.m. Wall Street time on Bloomberg 1130 in New York, Bloomberg 99.1 in Washington, Bloomberg 106.1 in Boston, and Bloomberg 960 in San Francisco.
Our flagship New York station is also available on your Amazon Alexa devices. Just say, Alexa, play Bloomberg 1130.
Plus, listen coast to coast on the Bloomberg Business app, Sirius XM, the iHeartRadio app, and on Bloomberg.com. I'm Nathan Hager.
And I'm Karen Moscow. Join us again tomorrow morning for all the news you need to start your day right here on Bloomberg Daybreak.